I mean, people will be left behind in the same way, we've seen lawyers that resisted the cloud back in the early 2010s, thinking, I wish I was joking, but wishing that this internet thing would blow over. You need to figure out how you embrace these technologies and embrace them responsibly. And that's the key thing. You cannot abdicate your responsibility as a professional to the AI. And just like whether you're leveraging an overseas employee to help you do work, or whether you're delegating work to a junior associate in your firm, or whether you're leveraging an AI to do the work, you ultimately need to own that work product.
Welcome back to the CPA Intelligence and Ethics Show. I'm your host, Garth Sheriff, and this is the podcast where we explore how AI is transforming our lives and what the CPA profession needs to do to adapt while maintaining our critical thinking and ethical standards vital to our place as trusted advisors. In this really informative and engaging episode recorded live at a major tech conference called Web Summit in Vancouver, which we were honored to be invited to as media, had the chance to sit down with the informative, experienced entrepreneur, Jack Newton, the CEO and co-founder of Clio, a global leader in legal practice management software. Jack's experience guiding lawyers through the cloud revolution and now the AI revolution is packed with insights that CPAs need to hear. In our conversation, we will cover everything from AI hallucinations and professional responsibility to what CPAs can learn from the legal profession's adoption curve. Jack makes the case that AI isn't just another tool. It's a transformational technology that demands that we rewire our mental models and take ownership of how we use it in professional services. You'll hear how Clio is building AI workflows without sacrificing client confidentiality or legal integrity, and how the same principles apply to CPAs managing risks, client data, and decision-making in high-stakes environments. We also dive into the bifurcation of adoption, big term, where early adopters gain a durable edge and late adopters risk being left behind. Jack brings his practical wisdom on how professionals can adapt to AI by thinking small, applying the AI in small tasks, and then scaling up. This episode is for every CPA wondering, how do I keep up? How do I lead? And how can I learn from other professionals facing the AI innovation and disruption? The answer starts here. Let's dive into my conversation with Clio founder and CEO, Jack Newton. All right, really excited to have Jack Newton, CEO and founder of Clio, the global leader in legal technology, an experienced business leader, technologist, and entrepreneur. Jack has propelled Clio to the forefront of the industry, shaping the future of how legal professionals work. Really excited to have you here, Jack. And our podcast is geared to, an adjacent profession in terms of CPAs and the legal profession having similar responsibilities when it comes to processes and procedures. And for our audience, because I think Clio is a great company as a use case for CPAs to understand where AI is entering the professional services space. Just to begin our conversation, could you describe Clio and the service it provides to the legal profession?
Absolutely. And first of all, thanks for having me on here. It's great to join you. And I guess the high level pitch for Clio is we help law firms move their entire practice into the cloud and help them manage everything from their tasks to their documents, to their client communications, to billing and collecting payment for their services, to a completely cloud-based system. And a big part of our value proposition going forward is weaving AI into those workflows and weaving AI into that system of record that we've built for law firms. We originally started out focusing on the needs of solos and very small firms, and we've been moving progressively up market over the years. And today, Clio really services the needs of law firms between 1 and 200 lawyers. And we recently acquired a company out of Manchester in the UK called ShareDo that is more enterprise focused, that really solves the needs of the 200 to 2,000 person firms. So today's Clio is really well positioned to address the needs of any law firm, ranging from the solo to the multi-thousand person law firm.
And I'm interested in both tiers, but I'm especially interested in the 1 to 200, right? When I look at the legal profession and the similarities to the CPA profession, let's say the practitioner, it could be a sole practitioner, it could be a partnership of 3 or 4 people. I'm not sure how you're seeing this. And this is a question for you. In the CPA profession, I think there is a dichotomy happening. The AI, the technology, cloud systems, whatever AI is being used for, we see it sort of top heavy, the big accounting firms. But if you're outside of that, I don't know of a Clio right now existing for the CPA space. And so they're sort of on their own in terms of understanding what to do with this. How receptive were those sole practitioners, those partners, the 1 to 200, in terms of adopting the technology that Clio offers?
Well, it was certainly, if you rewind the clock to 2008, the market, I think, was really bifurcated into kind of the classic technology diffusion curve that you talk about when you go through technology adoption cycles. And there's the early adopters, and then there's the early majority, the late majority, and the laggards. And we've certainly, over the course of the last 17 years, I think, gone through that full adoption curve with the cloud when it comes to legal. We had this, like I said, almost bifurcated response when we launched in 2008. It had some lawyers coming up to us at trade shows and other places we were marketing Clio, saying they've been waiting for somebody to build a product like this and thanked us for creating Clio. And then we had other lawyers coming up to us basically accusing us of encouraging malpractice, that there's no way lawyers should ever store their data in the cloud, and that they were violating their rules of professional conduct in doing so. So there was a lot of education. We saw some of the on-premise vendors react to the threat of the cloud by they've fomented a campaign of fear, uncertainty, and doubt around the cloud, and talked about the security risks of the cloud and so on. So we had to launch a real educational campaign around the advantages of the cloud and how you perform due diligence on a cloud provider before entrusting your client data with that cloud provider. And I think we're seeing another situation where history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And with AI, we're seeing some of the same reactions. We're seeing lawyers, again, say leveraging AI is encouraging malpractice, and it's not acceptable for lawyers to leverage AI. And then we have the early adopters jumping right in and figuring out how AI can benefit their practice. It's a very interesting time, I think, where both the pace of progress and the stakes are much higher than they were with the cloud era.
It's so interesting to me. I think CPA is on the same arc. I think you almost have the bifurcation. You have the early adopters, the really enthusiastic, and then I think, how did you say it?
The laggards, the late majority.
The late majority. I was just talking to a colleague, and for the space I'm in, it's audits, the audit profession. And Big Four firms, CPA firms, are bringing in AI into their audit methodology, but there are other players out there that are trying. And we had this conversation with a colleague of mine, and I was trying to understand if this particular company, which we're working with, had a generative AI chatbot to answer questions about risk. And older colleague of mine was just irate. He said, "You can't have a chatbot in this space." Just very much similar to what you described. Well, this is not something we can actually give over. And that's where the space is right now for a lot of CPAs. I think that you have those two camps. How do you bring over maybe those that are laggards? Because it's possible that if they wait too late, they're going to face consequences.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, people will be left behind in the same way. We've seen lawyers that resisted the cloud back in the early 2010s, thinking, I wish I was joking, but wishing that this internet thing would blow over, that would just be a fad. And of course, it's proven to be anything but a fad. And it's fundamentally transformed how people work. It's fundamentally transformed how consumers expect to interact with their professional service providers. And I think AI is going to be the same kind of punctuated evolution of technology, where again, you can either get on the train and you can start to benefit from these technologies, or you'll be left behind. And I think lawyers and CPAs alike need to realize that this is really existential. You need to figure out how you embrace these technologies and embrace them responsibly. And that's the key thing. And I think what is different about AI is it demands a shift in our mental model of how we can leverage these technologies. And large language models and generative AI can be massively helpful to any professional today, but you also need to supervise their work and you need to check their work. And so the classic example of how this has been misused in legal, and I'm sure there's flavors of this happening in the accounting space, but the canary in the coal mine was a couple of years ago, Stephen Schwartz, a Manhattan lawyer, filed a brief with 5 cases cited in that brief with the court and with opposing counsel. And the 5 cases that he cited in that brief were hallucinated. And he'd written this brief leveraging ChatGPT, didn't check the citations, which is obviously some form of malpractice. Like, you can't submit essentially someone else's work and not represent it properly and vet it properly before submitting it as your own. And the judge and opposing counsel called him out on this and said, we checked the cases you've cited, and there's a small problem with them. They don't exist.
Right.
And so again, ChatGPT did a great job of crafting an argument and crafting this brief, but you need to check the work of these large language models and realize that your mental model of how these systems work is profoundly different than, it needs to be profoundly different than the kind of trust we've built in, for example, Google or Wikipedia over the last 20 years of using those tools. You search something on Google, and 99.999% of the time it comes back and gives you the right answer.
Right.
You search something on Wikipedia, 99.999% of the time it comes back with an accurate article. And we're just not used to technology that lies to us. And that's exactly what LLMs will do on occasion. Now, over time, this is going to be addressed and mitigated and reduced. And we're already seeing this in the legal field, where there's bespoke legal AI solutions that can guarantee they're not hallucinating cases and not hallucinating citations. So this is where, maybe to round the bend on your question, I think professionals, lawyers, CPAs, and other types of doctors need to be looking to domain-specific AIs that can underwrite and mitigate the specific types of risk they might have in their industry.
Yeah, I know that case because that became
infamous. Yeah, he's the infamous Manhattan lawyer. Yeah,
it had an interesting effect, I thought, because I think you shared a panel with Gary Marcus. Did you not, or did you? Wait, am I thinking about another panel?
That was a different panel.
He might be just in my head because I've heard him. Because it was interesting for what that case became for some individuals in the professional space as don't use AI.
Well, that's exactly it. And I think you see a little bit of a fear-based response. And we saw something similar in the cloud era. I don't know if you remember back in 2010 or so, Dropbox had a massive security breach where any password would work to access any Dropbox account. And this became a rallying cry for lots of lawyers saying you can never use Dropbox in legal. And to this day, Dropbox is distrusted in legal because of this 2010 security breach. But it also had a cooling effect on the entire cloud adoption cycle because there's one strong example of the perils of cloud computing and what happens if you don't handle security properly. And I think the Stephen Schwartz case, and there's been a handful of others of hallucinated cases, and AI are, again, having both a positive and negative effect. They can have an overall cooling effect on AI adoption, but they're also teaching some valuable lessons that, again, you need to check the work. And ultimately, I think this is true both of CPAs and lawyers, you cannot abdicate your responsibility as a professional to the AI. And just like whether you're leveraging an overseas employee to help you do work, or whether you're delegating work to a junior associate in your firm, or whether you're leveraging an AI to do the work, you ultimately need to own that work product.
Yeah, but that's where we share the space. The due care, the professional judgment that has to be still
exactly
inside the CPA and the lawyer. So when we talk about the early adopter, and there's some risk to early adopting, sometimes you forget about some of those things that you maybe don't want to delegate to AI, or that individual that's potentially denying the power of this. Where would you bring in Clio and use cases to say, here's where we can show you that you can use AI responsibly as a lawyer, have those things that you care about, privacy, client confidentiality, but also get the upside, the efficiency side? Like, what's a use case inside of Clio for that?
Well, what's great, and I talked a little bit about this in my keynote at Web Summit today, this idea that AI is driving a convergence of the practice of law and business of law, I think is a really exciting trend. And as somebody is working in Clio's document management system, for example, just a few years ago, that document management system was about just storing bits and storing bits on the behalf of the customer that they've created in Microsoft Word or another word processing tool. Today, customers are looking at our document management system and looking at tools like Clio Draft, saying, I want help drafting a legal document. I need to draft an NDA. Help me draft an NDA. Or I have a mountain of legal documents relating to a personal injury case. take this mountain of documents and help me create a summary of what happened in this case, help me create a timeline of what happened in this case. And these are the kind of use cases that Clio is really shining and delivering a ton of value to our customers to basically, in a way where we're able to ensure accuracy, we're able to ensure data security, we're able to make the kind of guarantees that lawyers want to have around their data privacy and data security, but deliver real power through the AI, deliver material benefit to customers in terms of what they're seeing in that upside.
Right. And that builds in a lot of efficiency. Things that would have taken a lot of time frees up legal professionals
Absolutely.
to do other things.
And there's business of law applications. We have Clio Duo, our chatbot that's embedded directly within Clio. And you can ask Clio Duo questions like, where is my most productive marketing channel? I have another $10,000 of marketing spend I want to deploy. What's the best place for me to spend that? And it can look at your data and look at this data moat that's been accumulated in Clio and give recommendations based on where you've been generating leads from and make recommendations to you. You can talk to it in natural language and say, tell me what's important coming up for me this week. What next task should I focus on? And again, because Duo has an expansive view of everything that's going on in your law practice, it can make really pinpointed recommendations in terms of where you should be spending your time, what the most important client communication to get onto might be, and so on.
Yeah, and that's really valuable for the legal professional, again, to save time to make critical decisions. And I get one of the questions I have, in this space that lawyers and CPAs share is, what is that line? I don't think it's always that clear. I mean, it's clear in the case that you brought up with the hallucination of cases that were brought to a judge, but that line between, here's my relationship with the AI, this prompt data that I'm going to use, and here's something I shouldn't delegate. Because I think often in our space, there's a lot of judgment, professional judgment. How do you help shape that line for the legal professional?
Well, I think for one, that's a hard question to answer because I think that line is going to be moving as AI capabilities evolve as well. And just the day-to-day things you can use AI for and get really high-quality answers is something that is moving almost every day, if not every week. So it's a very exciting time. And I think really this is where human judgment needs to layer in and look at the specific scenario. What are the stakes of being wrong? I think often about, type 1 versus type 2 errors. Is this a one-way door or a two-way door? Put differently, if the AI gets this wrong and I learn it's wrong, can I reverse that, or is this irreversible? And again, looking to your ultimate responsibility to your client and being the arbiter of good judgment, what level are you going to trust the AI to? And then what do you need to be plugged in and say, I maybe use the AI output as a starting point, but then I underwrote and validated every aspect of what was output, and I can stand behind this. I think that's really the key dimension that both CPAs and lawyers need to think about balancing.
Yeah, because I think that's a really important part because I think that's where you get those two sides. The early adopters may not think about that as much potentially, and maybe needs to bring in that risk profile when they look at
and again,
ways
that's
to do
kind
that.
of that new mental model, right? Like, how do you think about, again, spreadsheets and Excel? You would just depend on the output of what's coming out of that spreadsheet. With AI, there's more judgment that needs to go into to what degree do you need to check the work, validate the work, and gain confidence that you can go to your client and say, I can fully stand behind the work product.
And that's a challenge. I think the CPAs and lawyers are older professions, and there's a self-selection bias to those who join that profession. I think some of them are change resistant, and they like the way things were. When you talk about spreadsheets, and I think the analogy has been made to Google and spreadsheets, is that the right analogy for this, or is this a different technology? Is it like a tool that we've seen, cloud computing, spreadsheet, or is it on another level?
I think it echoes some of the same transformation we've seen from those types of tools, but is dramatically more impactful and advancing at a pace that is unlike anything we've ever seen in the history of technology. And that's not hyperbole. As a technologist, watching this stuff change every day, every week, I have a hard time staying on top of the progress. You look at, just an example, Google I/O was last week, and what they demoed at Google I/O compared to what they demoed a year ago felt like a decade of progress, and it was in a year. So the pace of change is exponential. We as human beings are inherently unable to understand exponential growth in the kind of way we're experiencing with AI. We're very used to observing pretty linear progression. And I think if you look at the cloud computing era, again, being a technologist in 2007, when I saw the trend line for cloud computing, I could see really clearly over the next decade where this is going to go. And I could see really clearly what the opportunity for Clio was in tackling that cloud computing opportunity. When the iPhone was released in 2007, I could see really clearly the trajectory the iPhone was putting on the mobile industry and how things would change over the course of a decade. And again, the iPhone 11 was incrementally better to the iPhone 10, but not a generational change. Right. You look at AI, and just in the space of 3 years, the amount of progress that's been made since GPT-3, it's exponential. And I think we, as a society, never mind lawyers and accountants as individual professions, but we as a society are just going to go through the most radical transformation we've ever gone through since probably the Industrial Revolution. So I think it's an exciting and somewhat terrifying time to be navigating this, especially as professionals, especially as knowledge workers. When you look at legal as example, when Goldman Sachs ranked the list of professions that were going to be impacted by AI, they put legal at number 2 in the list, with 44% of tasks being automatable by AI, next only to administrative professionals. And I think accountants were not far behind lawyers in that list.
Yeah.
And again, what I'm very optimistic about, though, is Jevons paradox taking hold here. When you see the cost of delivering services, whether those are legal services or accounting services, you actually see the demand for those services expand. And in the same way that the mechanical loom really amplified and expanded the textile industry, in the same way that the assembly line for the automobile drove down the cost of automobiles and made them accessible to the masses, I think you look at legal services, you look at accounting services, and relatively small portion of the demand that could exist for those services if they were more affordable, if they were more accessible, if they had more frictionless experiences associated with them. And that's what I'm really excited about for the legal market in particular, is a stat I talk about all the time from the World Justice Project, that 77% of legal issues are not addressed by lawyers today. So if you think about that from an economist perspective, 23% of the market is served today, and just that 23% is $1 trillion of spend annually. And that latent market, the 77% that isn't addressed today, is a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity for entrepreneurial lawyers who can leverage AI and figure out, how do I price and package and deliver my legal services in a more efficient way, leveraging AI, leveraging the cloud to tap into that vast unmet demand. And I think there's a flavor of that opportunity that exists in the CPA space as well for the entrepreneurs that figure out how to embrace this technology, how to stay on top of a incredibly fast pace of innovation. But again, all you need to do, back to that technology diffusion curve, put yourself in that early adopter, early majority camp, and you're going to stay ahead of more than half the market.
Right.
And that gives you an incredible and durable competitive edge.
I have one last question for you, because this is really, a positive look at this in terms of potentially freeing up professionals. And again, I see so many similarities to CPAs and legal in terms of what we do and where there can be efficiencies. But coming back to that mental model, the remapping of how we look at things, I think that's a challenge, right? And especially as we talked about how quickly things are moving. You're in the space, you're a technologist, and it's hard for you to keep up. Like, how do we help our professionals? I know you're doing that with your clients, but overall, how do we help that group that looks at this and either dismisses it or says, this is too much, and potentially gets left out of this? And that could be a big swath of the professional space.
I mean, I think it's about adopting a learning and a growth mindset, which is easier said than done, but looking at this as an opportunity to grow and expand your capabilities, not being rigid in your thinking, and realizing that again, things are changing so fast that, unless you're running a firm and you think you're less than 5 years away from retiring and hanging up your hat, you need to be figuring out how to navigate this change. And again, taking that growth mindset, taking the time to learn, download these tools, play around with them, use them in low stakes ways to start with. I talked to a friend that was using ChatGPT to help him do interior design for his house and get recommendations for what colors would complement other colors. Use it to do research on topics you're just curious about. Use the deep research tool to map your competitive space and get feedback on what your competitors look like and how you stack up against them. And I think it's building trust. It's a bit like, riding a bike. You're going to fall over a few times, but eventually you're going to figure out how to get that balance right and get the velocity right. And then you can start using it for higher and higher stake tasks. Start using it to help you write a LinkedIn post or a blog post. Right. Use it to help you write a client communication. And just, I think we often look at these problems as kind of boil the ocean problems, and I need to change everything at once and do something grand. But with AI, I love the concept of, in Atomic Habits, one of my favorite books, James Clear talks about this story from the British cycling team, the British racing team, Dave Brailsford's aggregation of marginal gains, getting 1% improvements per day and figuring out small incremental ways of getting better. And the remarkable math of this compounding that you see with the aggregation of marginal gains is if you get 1% better at something for a year, every day, you actually become 37 times better at that thing at the end of a year. Not 37%, but 37 times. And so just that compounding effect of just getting a little bit better and finding new ways of leveraging these technologies and lacing them into your day, I think is the approach. And as you do that, you'll build trust, you'll build knowledge, you'll build experience, you'll build capability. And before you know it, you'll wonder how you lived without these tools. Right. And, I'm certainly at that point with ChatGPT, where if I didn't have ChatGPT to just answer random questions I've got about random things through the day, I'd feel lost. Yeah. And that's a tool I didn't even know existed 3 years ago. So it's just incredible how quickly some of these tools and technologies can get woven into your day, but they won't get into the fabric of how you do things unless you deliberately introduce them over time.
And I think that's a great message for our conversation. I think this a big part of this podcast is that, as a professional community, I think we care about all of our CPAs and lawyers, and obviously we compete against each other, but we don't want to see big swath of people left out of this because they're resistant and they don't see it.
Industry kind of navigate this change, not so much individuals, and how do you help each other and discover a new way of doing things.
There's a community part to this, and I really like that idea of incremental use and trying it small and then adding it up in a cumulative effect, and maybe we get more people to try, and that's the big goal of this podcast. So
big supporter of that, and we need to find ways of pushing people's envelopes and getting them to embrace some ideas that might be uncomfortable to start with. But again, you build some trust in these tools, use them in low stake situations and increasingly higher stake situations as you build trust. And pretty soon you'll wonder how you lived without them.
No, thanks for your time, Jack. I mean, you've done it with Clio, an amazing company, Canadian, Vancouver based. So it's been tremendously successful, and giving us your insight and really being on that first wave with the legal community, I think is very insightful for our audience. So I want to thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Jack.
Thank you, Jack, for sitting down with me at Web Summit. It was amazing to talk to you and a lot to take away for CPAs from that conversation. We talked about the importance of maintaining professional judgment, even when AI tools are doing some of the heavy lifting. As Jack said, you can't abdicate responsibility to the AI, whether it's a chatbot, an intern, or an offshore team. Your name is still on the work. Another key takeaway for me, we need a new mental model for this era. AI doesn't always return reliable answers, and as CPAs, we must remain critical, skeptical, and committed to accuracy. That's the ethical backbone of our profession. Jack also emphasized starting small and building trust. Use AI to draft memos, summarize documents, or explore trends. Low-stakes tasks that build your confidence while keeping client trust intact. That's how we evolve without compromising what matters most. And perhaps most powerfully, we talked about the shared responsibility we have as professionals, not just to adapt, but to help others adapt, because this isn't just a technological shift, it's a human one. Really excited to have that conversation. Hopefully you got the same takeaways as I did with Jack. Be sure to follow, rate, and share this podcast, the CPA Intelligence and Ethics Show, with fellow CPAs or other future-focused professionals. I'm Garth Sheriff, and remember, as AI reshapes our profession, it's up to us as CPAs to lead with insight, integrity, and the courage to ask the hard questions. Thank you for listening.